Time to style or form elements. And let's get right into it. So as always, let's start by checking out the HTML to see what we actually need to select here. So here is the form, and we have a couple of input fields and then the select field and the button we already styled. And of course also this span. So just like before, I believe the easiest way of doing this is to simply select the input and really these three different elements within the fact form. Okay, so let's search for fact form. Should be somewhere here. And yeah, let's copy this. But I will leave this here and I will do the form elements themselves here in the bottom. So fact form input. So input elements, and we will start by just doing these. So let's start with a nice background color. And in fact, I will give them the same as these here. So it's good to have some consistency in the design. And I believe it was this one here. Yeah, and just like with the buttons, we need to get rid of the border. So border, none, but I want to give it some border radius. And again, let's do something like ridiculously large. And then let's add some padding. So 16 pixels all around maybe. Okay, now let's try to write here and we get this really black color. So again, we should probably get the color and the font family from the rest of the page. So we will inherit. So you see that this is pretty similar to styling buttons. So font family, like this is some kind of even recipes that you will need to follow over and over again. Okay, so here we go. That looks normal, just like before. Now you see, or maybe you can't see, that this placeholder text here has this almost invisible color. So I can very barely see it, but I believe on the video it might not be possible. So we can, in fact, style that as well. However, it's not just a property here. Instead, we can basically select that placeholder itself and then give it a color. So a normal text color. So let me show you how that works. So fact form input. So this is again the input that we're styling. It's the same as this one. And then colon and another colon and then placeholder. And this double colon, this means that it's a so-called pseudo element. So it's not really an element that exists on the page, but kind of, so pseudo element. So this placeholder kind of exists, kind of doesn't. So that's why it's called a pseudo element, just like pseudo class, but those only have one colon. So let's select another color from here. So this is our normal text, or actually this one. And let's try here, because we're using this as the background color. So this might be a good choice for the placeholder color. Yeah, so now you can hopefully see it again. And you see my typo there. So source. And yeah, you also see that there's not enough space to really see what's going on. All right, so this is looking great, these two, but not so much this one. But this is very easy to fix because this is basically, we can style it in the exact same way. So we just write fact form again and select, and that's it. So it works the exact same way, and now we have it nicely selected as well. And so now we have it nicely styled in the exact same way. And again, don't forget the comma here. So like this, it becomes a list. We style the inputs and we style the select. Next up, let's also style this text a little bit. So fact form and then the span inside. Let's make it a bit bolder with the font weight that we used before of 600. And let's increase also the font size to 18 pixels. Okay, and if you're wondering where I'm getting all of these values from, which seem kind of weird, those are basically like some scales or some predefined values that I like to use. And basically all web designers have some predefined values that they keep using, because otherwise it's just too much work to basically randomly come up with some values. But if you at some point go a little bit deeper into this, then you will learn how to do that as well. So basically come up with a scale for the font size and not just use something completely random. But anyway, let's also give it some margin to the right here, even though we haven't really talked about the layout here yet. But still, let's say margin right 18 pixels. Okay, and so as I was just saying, let's talk a bit about the layout here. So right now we have everything actually centered, but that's only because we use text align center. So that might not be the most robust solution there. So right here. So let's get rid of that and let's actually use Flexbox again. So display flex to make it a flex container, and so then automatically all of these here become the flex items, right? Here you might not need as much padding on the sides. Okay. Now let's align the items to the center vertically. So that puts the 200 here in a nice position. And then let's add a gap of 16 pixels. 16. And all right. Now let's just see what happens when the screen becomes really big. So then we get all this empty space here on the side, right? So what do you think we should do with this? Should we maybe center all of this here? So using justify content set to center. Well, before we do that, I would actually like to give each of them here a different width. So just to make sure that they get a nice width. So let's actually come down here again. So width, let's say 220 pixels. Or maybe let's say 200, maybe 250. Well, that might be a little bit too much, but we can use that max width, remember? So that looks good. What happens if we decrease it? Then they should all become a little bit smaller, or well, or somehow they don't. But that's because they are flex items. So the width property works a little bit different on flex items, but I'm not going to go into that here. So let's just say 220 pixels like we had before. And so that then works for many width. So mainly for the larger width. But then again, what should we do with this remaining space here? Well, what I think we should do is to increase a lot this form element here. So to fill up all the remaining space with this first input field here, because this is the most important one by far, where we place the fact itself. So this is where the user will write the fact. So I think it makes sense that this should basically fill up all the entire space that is left. So how do you think we do that? So actually I hinted at it already a few lectures before. So remember how here we used the flex shrink property and set it to 0 because we didn't want to allow this element here, this entire vote buttons, to shrink. And so with that, we basically controlled a little bit the width of this element, not allowing it to shrink. Now we can do the opposite. So we can allow elements to expand, so to take up as much space as they want. So all the empty space, basically, they can then take up. So let me show you how that works. So we need to select this first element here. And well, that will be a little bit tricky again. So let me show you. So hopefully you're not getting confusing as we're doing multiple things at the same time. But yeah, hopefully not. And this is also, keep in mind, just a crash course. And so this is a bit of the crash feeling maybe. But anyway, this is how we can do it. So we have these input fields, and then we can use the first child pseudo class to, well, as the name says, select only the first one. And let's prove that, so that we're only really getting the first one. Well, that didn't work, but it's because I wrote from, not form. So that should fix it, and indeed, it is now red. So we selected only the first child, okay? But of course, we don't want the background, but instead we want flex. And now it's not shrink, now it is flex grow. And we set it to 1. So the default is 0, which makes that the element cannot grow as much as it pleases. But when we set it to 1, this element will take up all the space that it wishes to. And so now this got a lot bigger. And as we make the page bigger, you see that these elements stay the same and this one expands. So it grows using the Flexbox terminology. And with this, we are actually done with this form, or almost. I want to now give it these rounded corners here and the same here. And we also need to get rid these hash symbols here. Somehow they remained there where they don't belong. So here and here and here and here. And now the border radius. So that's in the effect form itself, which is somewhere up here. Or maybe you structured your code differently. So just find it there. Well, that's actually not the fact form. Yeah, here it is. So let's give it a border radius. And this time not the ridiculously big one, but one that actually only slightly rounds the corners. So let's say 16 pixels. And beautiful, just like this. And to finish, I will apply the exact same thing to the fact list items. And there we go. So let's close, well, maybe not, but just like this, and compare it with our original. Well, this one again is smaller and it has all this content, but it is the same. So we are basically now done styling our application, which is really great news. And it didn't take a lot of time. So of course it took some more time because I was explaining you what I was doing all the time. But just writing CSS for an interface like this takes like half an hour or so. It depends on how fast you are, of course, but yeah, writing CSS itself, even for a fairly, well, not really complex, but yeah, for an interface like this, it can be fast. And if you ask me, it can also be a lot of fun. Now in the next lecture, what I want to do is to fix these issues that you are starting to see now. So you see that there's not enough space for this, not enough space here, and yeah, it creates all this vertical scrolling that we don't want. So we need to now adapt this user interface to also work on smaller screens. And so that will be our next and final lecture in this section.